and to
Nia. It is my pleasure now to
Mr. Carney as best price
on Canadian goods in retaliation.
You can collect it even if you never worked a single day in your life. No employer, no pay stubs, no decades of grinding at a job. And here's the part that stuns people the most. This payment has absolutely nothing to do with your Canada pension plan. It is separate, it is stackable, and thousands of Canadians are quietly leaving this money on the table simply because they confuse it with something else entirely. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what this benefit is, who qualifies, how the amount is calculated, and the one small mistake that could delay your first payment by months. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you will understand old age security better than most people who are already receiving it. So let us start with the number that brought you here. As of right now, the maximum monthly old age security payment for a Canadian aged 65 to 74 sits at $751.97. That is the ceiling for this age group. And I want you to really let that figure sink in because it is not a one-time bonus. It is not a rebate. It is a recurring monthly deposit that arrives in your bank account month after month for the rest of your life. Over the course of a single year, that adds up to just over $9,000. And that is before we even talk about the other benefits that can layer on top of it. But before you get too excited about the number, we need to clear up the single biggest source of confusion in the entire Canadian retirement system, and it is this. Old age security and the Canada Pension Plan are not the same thing. They are two completely different programs, funded in completely different ways, with completely different rules. Yet an enormous number of people treat them as if they were one benefit. They think that if they are getting one, they must be getting the other. Or worse, they assume that if they never contributed enough to CPP, they are somehow disqualified from OAS as well.
We're engaged with the U.S. In ongoing discussions on some of those specific strategic areas. Those conversations are ongoing.
That belief is costing people real money, and I want to fix it for you right now. Here is the cleanest way to understand the difference. The Canada Pension Plan is an earnings-based program. It is built entirely on contributions. Every time you earned a paycheck during your working years, a slice of that income was set aside into CPP, and your employer matched it. So the amount of CPP you receive in retirement is directly tied to how much you put in and for how long. If you worked for 40 years at a solid income, your CPP reflects that. If you barely worked, your CPP is small, or in some cases, non-existent. CPP is, in a sense, money you earned and set aside for your future self. Old age security works on a completely different principle. It is not built on your paychecks. It is not built on contributions. It does not care how much money you made during your career, and it does not care whether you had a career at all. OAS is what we call a residence-based benefit. It is funded through the general tax revenues of the Canadian government, which is a fancy way of saying it comes out of the general pool of public money rather than a personal contribution account with your name on it. And because of that, the qualifying test is entirely different. The government does not ask, how much did you contribute? It asks, how long did you live in Canada? Now, do you see why mixing these two up is so dangerous? If you spent your life thinking, well, I did not work much, so retirement benefits are not really for me, you may have been walking right past $751 a month without ever realizing it was yours to claim. Because for old age security, your work history is simply not part of the equation. Let me really hammer this point home, because it is the heart of everything.
Conventionnel. Et tant que ce sera le cas, la plus grande partie possible de cette énergie devrait venir du Canada. Une énergie produite de façon...
You can receive both CPP and OAS at the same time. They do not cancel each other out. They do not compete. They are not an either-or choice. A retired Canadian can be collecting their monthly CPP based on their working years, and on top of that, collecting their monthly OAS based on their years of residence. And those two deposits arrive together as a combined retirement income. So when you hear someone say, I get about this much from the government each month. What they are often describing is the two programs stacked on top of one another. If you have only been thinking about one of them, you have been looking at half the picture. So now the natural question becomes, if OAS is not based on how much I worked, then how exactly is my amount decided? And this is where it gets interesting, because the rule is refreshingly simple compared to the complexity of most government programs. Your old age security amount is based on the number of years you have lived in Canada after the age of 18. That is the core measurement. Not your income during those years, not your job title, not your contributions, just the years you called Canada home as an adult. The full maximum pension, the $751.97 we started with, is designed for someone who has lived in Canada for 40 years after the age of 18. 40 years of adult residence unlocks the full amount. And here is the beautiful part for the point I have been making. Nowhere in that requirement does it say you had to be employed for those 40 years. You could have spent those decades raising a family, caring for relatives, volunteering, running a household, or simply living your life. As long as you were here, as long as those years accumulated, they count toward your old age security. This is precisely why someone who never held a formal job can still walk into retirement with a meaningful, reliable monthly income from this program. Now, what happens if you did not live in Canada for the full 40 years? Maybe you immigrated later in life. Maybe you spent stretches of time abroad. Do you lose everything? Absolutely not. And this is another detail people get wrong. Old age security is not all or nothing.
President Trump's position, as we have welcomed his engagement from the start in this conflict, he's played, as usual, a decisive role.
There is a partial pension. The system works on a fractional basis, breaking your entitlement into 40ths. So for every year of residence you have accumulated after age 18, you earn 1/40th of the maximum pension. To even open the door to OAS while living in Canada, you generally need a minimum of 10 years of residence after the age of 18. Hit that 10-year mark, and you begin to qualify for a partial pension. From there, each additional year builds your amount higher, 1/40th at a time, until you reach the full 40 years and the maximum payment. Let me give you a picture of how that math feels in real life. Imagine someone who came to Canada as an adult, and by the time they reached 65, had lived here for 25 years. They have not hit the full 40, so they will not receive the full maximum. But 25 years of residence gives them 25/40ths of the pension. That is a substantial partial payment arriving every single month for the rest of their life, built purely on the fact that they lived here. No contributions required, no employment history examined, just presence and time. And that partial pension still receives every quarterly inflation adjustment, so it does not sit frozen. It keeps pace with the cost of living right alongside the full pension. This is the moment I really want you to pause and think about who this benefit was designed to protect. It was designed to make sure that Canadians reaching their senior years have a baseline of income they can count on, regardless of what their working life looked like. The homemaker who never drew a formal salary, the person whose career was interrupted by illness or caregiving, the individual who worked in cash economies or informal arrangements that never fed into a pension. Old age security exists so that these people are not left behind. And that is exactly why tying it to work history the way people mistakenly do misses the entire point of the program. Now let me address something you might be wondering about as these numbers climb. You may have heard that older seniors receive more. That is true, and it is worth knowing. The figure we have been discussing, the $751.97, applies to the age group of 65 to 74. Once a Canadian reaches the age of 75, the monthly old age security amount steps up to a higher maximum, thanks to a permanent increase built into the program for that older age band. So your OAS is not necessarily a flat, unchanging number for the rest of your life. It has the potential to rise as you move into your later years, and that increase happens automatically. You do not have to fill out anything or request it. When you cross that age threshold, the system adjusts on its own. And speaking of adjustments, this is another feature that quietly works in your favor. Old age security is reviewed and recalculated 4 times a year, once every quarter, in January, April, July, and October. These reviews are tied to the cost of living measured by the Consumer Price Index. The purpose is to make sure your payment does not lose its value as prices rise. When inflation pushes up the cost of groceries, housing, and everyday essentials, your OAS is designed to move up with it. So the number we are talking about today is a snapshot of the current quarter, and it has a built-in mechanism to keep climbing over time rather than shrinking in real terms. That is a powerful thing in a world where the cost of living rarely stands still. Now I have shown you what OAS is, how it stands apart from CPP, and how residence builds your amount. But there is one more piece of this puzzle that trips people up right at the finish line, and I promised you at the start that I would explain it. Because knowing you qualify is not the same as actually getting the money into your account. And this is where a small misunderstanding can cost you months of payments. Here is what many Canadians assume. They assume that the moment they turn 65, old age security simply appears in their bank account, automatically, no action needed. And for a lot of people, that assumption is partly correct. The government does operate an automatic enrollment system. In many cases, Service Canada already has enough information about you to enroll you automatically. And when that happens, you will receive a letter, usually the month after your 64th birthday, telling you that you have been automatically enrolled and that your payments will begin. If you get that letter, wonderful.
We've already announced 14 nation-building initiatives supporting over half.
Much of the work is done for you, and you simply need to confirm that the details are correct. But here is the trap. Automatic enrollment does not happen for everyone. It depends on whether the government already has the right information on file about you. And if they do not, you will not be enrolled automatically, which means your old age security will not start on its own. It will sit there waiting, unclaimed, until you take action. In those cases, the responsibility falls on you to apply. If you are relying on the assumption that it will all happen by itself, and you are one of the people who was not automatically enrolled, you could reach 65, then 66, wondering why nothing is arriving, all while the payments you were entitled to slip away month by month. So here is the rule to carve into your memory. Do not simply wait and hope. If you have not received a letter confirming your automatic enrollment by the time you are about 6 months away from your 65th birthday, that is your signal to act. That is the moment to check your status and, if necessary, submit an application yourself. The general guidance is to apply well ahead of when you want your payments to begin, ideally around 6 months in advance, so that everything is processed and your very first payment lands right on schedule rather than arriving late. A little bit of attention at the right moment protects you from a delay that could otherwise stretch on for months. And let me tie this back to the theme running through this entire video. The whole reason people leave this money on the table is not because they were formally denied. It is because of misunderstanding. They confuse OAS with CPP and assume their thin work history disqualifies them. Or they assume enrollment is always automatic and never check. Or they simply do not realize that a benefit based on residence, not employment, was sitting there for them the entire time. Every one of those mistakes is fixable, and every one of them comes down to information. The information you now have. So let us bring it all together because I want you to walk away from this crystal clear. Old age security is a monthly payment, currently reaching a maximum of $751.97 for those aged 65 to 74. It is completely separate from the Canada Pension Plan. CPP is earned through your contributions and your working years. OAS is earned simply by living in Canada as an adult. You can, and many people do, receive both of them at the same time, stacked together into one combined retirement income. Your OAS amount is based on how many years you lived in Canada after the age of 18, with the full pension unlocking at 40 years of residence, and a partial pension available with as little as 10 years. Your work history does not factor into it at all, which means you can qualify even if you never held a paying job. The amount is adjusted every quarter to keep up with the cost of living, and it steps up to an even higher maximum once you reach the age of 75. And finally, while While many Canadians are enrolled automatically and receive a confirmation letter, not everyone is. So if you have not heard anything by roughly 6 months before your 65th birthday, that is your cue to check your status and apply so your payments start on time. If there is one idea I want you to hold on to after everything we have covered, it is this.
On energy and infrastructure, we're removing roadblocks that have been getting in the way of big projects. On trade, to sell our goods and create new jobs, we're building relationships.
Old age security was built on a simple, generous premise that if you have made Canada your home, the country will provide you with a foundation of income in your later years, no matter what your career looked like. It does not judge you by your job title or your salary. It honors the years you were here. And the only real risk is not eligibility. The only real risk is not knowing. Now that you do know, you are in a far better position than most to make sure that not a single dollar of what you are entitled to gets left behind. Take a moment today to think about where you stand. Count the years you have lived in Canada since you turned 18. Consider whether you are approaching that 6-month window before 65. And remember that this payment is yours to claim, separate and distinct from everything else you may be counting on. Because understanding how this works is the very first step to making sure the money actually reaches you.